Good afternoon. Today the members of Group 12 will be doing a presentation on the variation procedure and further relating the variation procedure with a real-life scenario. The scenario that we will be presenting today will be the hire of the line pipe due to poor site conditions. This scenario can be followed on slide 2. The scenario is as follows. Due to the constant heavy rainfall that Melbourne has received throughout the month of August, it has left the job site of 9 Gilmore Street, Burwood, very wet. This has further made it unsafe and not possible for concrete trucks to be able to drive in and out of the job site to pour the remaining piles, which was an agreement on the contract. The job currently has 35 out of 60 piles all poured. A further 10 out of the 25 piles have been left open for the weekend as a concrete truck couldn't gain access on the Friday. These 10 piles are a safety hazard and have also been filling up with water, which makes it important that they are filled with concrete as soon as possible. Additionally, the remaining piles will all be affected by the wet conditions in the forecast, meaning a concrete line pump will have to be used to pour all the remaining piles. Company Group 12 Contracting has been directed to hire a concrete pump to pour the remaining 25 piles in order to keep the job running smoothly and on schedule. The remaining piles will take a total of 3 days to be drilled and poured, which means a concrete pump will have to be hired for a total of 3 days in order to finish off the piling of the job.
Different types of variations in construction are as follows. 1. Unavoidable variations, which are necessary variations implemented to minimize adverse effects such as health and safety. 2. Variation for the convenience of the client. These are implemented to benefit the client. And lastly, 3. Variations for the convenience of the contractor, implemented to benefit the contractor, either for cost reasons or time reasons. For this particular scenario, our type of variation will be classified as an unavoidable variation, this being due to the weather and the safety hazard of having piles left open. Further, as this variation has been caused by wet weather conditions, this variation has been issued in order to minimize the construction costs for the builder. In this scenario, the builder really has two options. Option 1, create site access through laying down crushed rock throughout the entire job in order to allow concrete trucks to be able to drive in and out. This option is not really feasible, as you would have to pay initially for the crushed rock and then further pay for the removal of the crushed rock, alongside with having the risk of the truck still getting stuck. Or to go with option 2, which is to hire a concrete pump for 3 days, pour the 10 open piles first while completing the drilling and setting of cages, ready for them to be poured in the remaining 2 days of the pump being hired, and this option has a lot more feasibility for the principal and the contractor.
The parties that are involved with this variation are the principal, who is the person whom is contracting the works. In this scenario, the principal is the builder who is running the project. Superintendent. The superintendent in this scenario is the site supervisor, who will issue the request for the variational works to be carried out. Contractor. In this particular scenario, the contractor is Group 12. The contractor is the one who will be carrying out the variation works. Appropriate clauses. Clause 36.1, directing variation. The contractor should not vary the work under the contract except if directed in writing by the superintendent. This being due to unexpected rainfall, a pump will be needed. Clause 36.2. Superintendent should send a notice in writing advising the contractor of the proposed variation to hire a concrete pump. This variation will then either be accepted or declined. The contractor should then provide an estimate of the cost to the superintendent and let them know how this will affect the construction program. Under clause 36.2, the principal will reimburse the contractor for the reasonable costs of completing the variation. Finally, clause 36.3, the variations for the convenience of the contractor.
Here is a quick overview of the 5 key stages that are associated with the variation process. Firstly, the superintendent will issue the request for the variation. This request has to be in writing, and that is very important. Secondly is the contractor advice. This is advice on how the variation will be carried out. It will include things such as the effects the variation will have on the site, alongside with the time and cost of the variation. Thirdly, the contractor then submits a detailed quote of how much the variation will actually cost. The variation is then approved. And lastly, once given the all clear, the contractor will then proceed to go ahead with the variation works. Furthermore, when specifically relating to our specific scenario, the steps are as follows. Step 1 will include the superintendent to issue a request for the variation. This variation request will include the contractor to supply a concrete line pump in order to pour the remaining 20 piles. Step 2 is the contractor advice. This is where the contractor will let the superintendent know that the pump will be hired for a total of 3 days. The cost of the pump will be $180 per hour, with a minimum of 6 hours use per day. A further cost of $180 for travel each day, and also a cost of $10 per square metre that is pumped through the line pump. In step 3 of the variation process, this is when a detailed quotation is prepared. The first part of preparing the quote is to document the finer details of the variation. This includes things such as the job number, the address, the number of variations this job has had, date of the variation, the type of variation, the total cost, and also the amount of delay days the variation will cause this site. Step 3 further goes into the finer details of the variation quote. Here you can see that the concrete line pump will have a minimum of 6 hours use per day at an hourly rate of $180 per hour. There is a further cost of $10 per square metre and a travel fee of $180 per day. After a total of 34.3 cubic metres have been pumped into the remaining piles over a 3-day period, this variation comes to the total of $4,557, including GST. In step 4 of the variation procedure, this is when the variation is either approved or declined by the principal. In our particular scenario, the variation is approved. That means that in step 5, works can commence. After these works have been completed, the contractor can then bill the principal for the variation works. This usually takes up to 1 to 2 months. On behalf of Group 12, I hope you guys enjoyed our quick run through the variation procedure. Thank you for listening.